All right, so we are going to start off with the origins of progressivism, or the progressive era. So at the turn of the century, so we're talking early 1900s, many Americans believed and hoped that they would be able to change American society for the better. And these people, these Americans, were definitely reform-minded citizens. They also were known as the progressives, and they worked for many different causes at national, state, and local levels. Now, some of the reforms they actually achieved had lasting effects on American society, and we're still seeing those today. Towards the end of the 1800s, problems resulting from rapid industrialization, immigration, urban growth kind of spur the creation of many reform movements during what is known as, again, the Progressive Era from 1890 to about 1920. And so, we've covered industrialization, immigration, urbanization, and again, all of the issues that occurred during these eras were kind of resolved, or on their way to being resolved through the Progressive Era. All right, so the roots of the 20th century reform movement. So many of the new reform movements were an outgrowth of earlier reform groups, such as the populists. So we talked a lot about the populists, and these, again, were the farmers who were just struggling to make ends meet. They were foreclosing on their land, on their homes, and just in serious, serious debt, and wanted the government to get involved, regulate the railroad companies who were just overcharging them, and just causing them to go into even more debt. And so they wanted a number of things. One thing that they wanted was a secret ballot. They wanted direct election of senators so that their voices would be more heard. And a number of other things. And so some of these issues were finally dealt with during the Progressive Era, but the issue arose during the populist movement, or populism. And that's just one example. The new reformers were reacting to the effects of the era's rapid industrialization, immigration, and urbanization. So industrial workers, again, suffered low incomes and cycles of unemployment, and so these issues were addressed during the Progressive Era. Working conditions and living conditions for the poor were deplorable, again, addressed during the Progressive Era. Still, foreign and rural immigrants kept seeking factory jobs in cities. So slums and congestion plagued many urban areas, as we discussed. To care for these growing populations, governments expanded their public services, but political corruption and graft often kept these services inadequate. And we talked a little bit about this during the Gilded Age with Boss Tweed and some of the corruption that occurred specifically in New York City around Tammany Hall, that political machine that Boss Tweed was the boss of, and how, him having complete control of the voting system made it so that he could get candidates into a place that he could take advantage of or bribe, and again, just created a really, really ineffective system that was only making, a very small number of people wealthy. Graft is just offering money to gain an advantage, and Boss Tweed was king of this, offering people money in exchange of a vote for the candidate he was backing, or giving various politicians deals or money in order to gain an advantage. All right, so the progressives, their goals and beliefs. Progressivism was not a single unified movement. People who called themselves progressives did not all share the same views. For the most part, though, their goals fell into four categories: social, moral, economic, and political. So social would be having to do with society or people. Moral would obviously have to do with ethics. Economic would be surrounding the economy or money, revenue. And then political would be, more government related reasons. So most reformers were people of average wealth who held in common at least 4 specific beliefs. First, government should be more accountable to its citizens. Government should curb the power and influence of wealthy interests. And it's important to note here that progressives included Democrats, Republicans, and many other politicians from various political parties. Government should be given expanded powers so that it could become more active in improving the lives of its citizens, and government should become more efficient and less corrupt so that they could competently handle an expanded role. Two early reformers. So in 1879, reformer Henry George wrote Progress and Poverty, an effort to explain why poverty continued to plague such an advanced civilization. He believed poverty resulted from speculation. And speculation, just people bought and held onto land until its price went up, and then this then prevented others from using the land productively. Because again, they were just buying the land to kind of make a profit. To solve this problem, George proposed that the government charge landowners a single tax on the value of the land itself. This would make speculation in land less attractive by increasing the cost of holding land without using it. And it actually had a very powerful effect. In 1888, newspaper editor Edward Bellamy published Looking Backward. He influenced the Populist Party platform in 1892 and was a bestseller. In this novel, a man undergoes hypnosis in 1887 and wakes up to a utopian country where the government has taken over the largest companies and there is no longer poverty or political corruption. Also in his novel, he explains that the government reorganized the companies with the goal of meeting human needs rather than making profits, and understand also that utopian is just a perfect or ideal state. So again, this has to do with the idea that many favored at this time, that the biggest companies should be controlled by the government. And again, this was mostly to avoid corruption because a lot of the major industries or businesses were corrupt and they needed to be controlled, or many people believed that they needed to be controlled by the government. Okay, the muckrakers. So these were journalists such as Upton Sinclair. They play a major role in alerting the public to wrongdoings in politics and business. Theodore Roosevelt called such writers muckrakers. While Roosevelt approved of the legitimate exposure of wrongdoing, he condemned those who earn their livelihood by telling scandalous falsehoods about honest men. Okay, so again, Roosevelt believed that if you're telling the truth, and this is honestly the case, and you're just trying to get the truth out, then he would back it, and he would do something about it even. But if you are just making up lies just to get attention or become famous, then, you know, he is not going to be a supporter of what you're doing. So you're probably wondering where the name muckrakers comes from. So a muck rake is just a rake or pitchfork used to clean manure and hay out of stables. And Roosevelt took the term muckraker from a book written by John Bunyan's. It was written in 1678, and it was a book about Pilgrim's Progress, in which one of the characters was too busy raking filth on earth to lift his eyes to heaven. I also have written here The Jungle. Again, Upton Sinclair, and we'll be looking at this in more detail. Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle. Roosevelt read this book and said and I put this in quotes, "The specific evils you point out shall, if their existence be proved, and if I have power, be eradicated," to get rid of or to destroy, is what that word means. So basically he was saying, if this is true and it can be proven, then I will do something about it. Okay, progressive reform organizations. We have the labor movement. The union movement slowly grew in the 1890s. Employers discouraged union membership. If unions did form, business leaders could normally count on the courts to side with them. One example of this would be courts issued injunctions that prevented workers from going on strike. Unions continued to fight for better working conditions through collective bargaining instead of individual bargaining. And remember, collective bargaining is just when a larger group of people try to make some sort of an agreement. So we saw this with the NFL several years back when all of the football players went on strike against the owners because they wanted shorter seasons and additional pay, and the owners were refusing to do so. And we weren't sure if we were going to have a football season for a little bit, but they obviously sorted it out, and we did. But that was collective bargaining, all of the football players kind of coming together to advocate for themselves rather than advocating individually. Socialists, many in favor of socialism, which is a less extreme version of communism, where all of the means of production are publicly owned, and basically the government has complete control over the people and everything that they do. Again, less extreme version, wanted to put an end to the capitalist system, and the capitalist system is quite different, and it's actually what we have here in the U.S., and that's where you can start your own business, like maybe a woodworking business, and you can build furniture, and then you can sell that furniture, and then you get to keep the profits. In a socialist economy or system, or a communist system, you will be told what job you're going to do. That money will not be yours. The means of production will not be yours. It's all publicly owned. There's no private property. You don't get to keep your profits. The government takes your profits and then distributes them evenly, no matter how hard you work, no matter how much harder you work than the person next to you. And so, again, on the spectrum, socialism is a lot less extreme, so it's not all the way to that point where communism is. But very different systems. Again, it says here, capitalist system, distribute wealth more evenly and have government ownership of American industries. So that would be explaining a socialist system versus a capitalist one. Most socialists hoped to accomplish their goals through the ballot box, hoping that if they could get somebody elected that was of the Socialist Party, then they could get a lot of the things that they wanted done, actually achieved. And most progressives did not support sweeping economic and political changes, and this was mostly because most Americans believed in democracy, and they did not want to disrupt that system or the free enterprise system. They didn't want to get rid of capitalism, and so they wanted to eliminate government corruption and guard the welfare of workers and the people. So they wanted to eliminate the corruption, but they didn't actually want the government to have complete control of the industry or business, because then that infringes upon the capitalist system. So it was hard for many to get on board this Socialist Party because of that. All right, progressive reform organizations, women's groups. Women played a pivotal role in the reform movement of the progressive era, like the National Consumers League NCL, 1899. This intended to unite local consumers leagues. Women investigated the conditions under which goods were made and sold. Leagues insisted that factories obey state factory inspection laws and pay a minimum wage. Votes for women were central to achieving these goals. Needed the right to vote in order to influence government actions. Women activists did not agree on methods for reforming society, but all knew that they were powerless without political rights. Two main women reformers, Florence Kelley, which some of you did your fake book on in my honors class, a leader in the work for labor reform. Because of her efforts, Illinois passed a law prohibiting child labor, limiting work hours for women, and regulating sweatshop conditions. Served as a general secretary of the National Consumers League, where she led movements to outlaw child labor and protect workers, especially women. All right, so progressive reform meets with resistance. Progressives sought increased government involvement in people's lives in housing, healthcare, and even in content of movies. This led to resistance, often among those very people that the